anything big. It was just the. I was just wondering about how Rachel Maddow identifies as. Does she identify as a woman, or maybe somebody knows? But that's not really important to what she's talking about here. Just I was just interested about that.
Are starting to be mismatched with what we're seeing from him in reality. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, well, tell me about that. I may want to talk about that, or maybe make a video about how I'm yeah, Bosnian from Ukraine, who's now a refugee. So anyway,
I think it's very fair. Let's put it this way. I woke up deliberately at 4:30 in the
Polish from Italy, cool.
morning, hoping to read in real time or watch.
Wait, are you Polish? Like you're a Pole, but you live in Italy, right?
Watch Putin's speech on Red Square, as you pointed out in your really excellent summation of what.
Oh, cool. Parents Polish and born in Italy. Okay, that's a nice combination, I guess. I did escape to Poland, by the way, when escaping Ukraine. My family and I, with our baby, we escaped to Poland, and the Poles were really, really nice to us. They offered us some tea. They didn't bother us with documents and stuff. So it was pretty great. Yeah, it was really nice. After 4 days in a car, sleeping in a car with a 4-month-old baby, it was kind of nice to be welcomed there. And we stayed a while at an Airbnb in Poland, and then we went to Bosnia later on.
What happened today and what's going on. May 9th is always a big deal because it is the great national unifying narrative.
Anyway, so as I was saying, there is this class of people, it's usually journalists, that are trying to explain Putin's behavior as if he's some enigmatic, mysterious animal that you have to, be an expert in understanding. Okay, well, Putin's, behave like this in the summer, and this is, water makes them excited, and things like that. It's just silly. So I hate this class of people. I think they're full of shit. I don't think they know anything about anything. They're just like widely speculating, guessing. Putin is super unpredictable. Putin loves to do things. Well, I'm doing it now, but I'm just saying what he's doing, right? Obviously, he likes to do unpredictable things. When everybody expects that he will invade on a certain date, he doesn't. When everybody expects that he will declare war or mobilization or whatever on a specific speech, in this case, the Victory Day, he doesn't, right? So all of these people are, just full of shit. So your family is from North Poland, so they went all the way to the south to help there. Oh, that's really nice. I was in Poland, I would have went to. Well, good for you. Yeah, there was my family was kind of lucky that we had a place to go, right? But there were people who had nowhere to go. So they were, they were just living in tents, I guess, temporarily. I don't know what, I think I think Poland did a really good thing where they kind of quietly prepared for what was coming, because they were kind of, everybody was kind of expecting this as a possibility. So they kind of prepared in advance. And then when people started coming, they were kind of prepared. There were some glitches. Initially, I remember Poland requiring COVID testing and stuff, but that went away quickly. And yeah, it was pretty great. Poland was awesome. To be fair, Slovakia was good. Even Hungary was okay with, accepting refugees and helping out. So, but Poland, I think, was the best in terms of assistance.
Victory in what's called the Great Patriotic War. As important as it is here, it's in many ways much more important in Soviet history and even in the post-Soviet space.
Sure, because it's. I think the people in the United States mostly see the war as something that's I'm talking about Second World War. They see it as something that, America went in and then the war ended because of that. It's pretty much the Soviets that, kicked ass, Second World War. And it's pretty much the Soviet that died in Second World War. I mean, it's incredible numbers if you look that up. So, yeah, it's a bigger deal for sure there. We like to help and we hate Russians. Well, I did see that. I don't think you should hate all Russians. To be fair to Russians, it's a complicated conversation. It's a very special country and it's a very special people, and I think there's a lot of propaganda around you. But there are people who, I mean, there's Putin has a lot of support for sure, and but also don't underestimate the propaganda that they're receiving on their side, right? So that's a nuanced conversation that we may want to have on a separate stream. But yeah, my wife is Ukrainian. She hates Russians, so and I totally understand that. And we talked about that a lot. But I don't think I have hate. Although, when I was escaping Kiev, it was Russian missiles that were flying over my head and exploding and stuff. But it was my baby who was in danger, and myself and my wife. But never underestimate the power of stupidity, misinformation, and all of that stuff. It's really hard when you go to the personal level. It's really hard to attribute that to just average Russians. Average Russians watch TV, believe things they hear, and yeah, they feel empathy and compassion for people in Donbass. They think, Russia is trying to save them or whatever, and that narrative seems to be working really well for them. So, they support Putin even when he keeps them in poverty. They have a lower minimum wage than China at this point. Yeah, as I said, they're very special people. It's very weird. Russia says that Ukraine and Russia are they're the same people, but they really aren't. There's a lot of difference. Ukrainians hate their politicians. There's no politician who's super popular in Ukraine that you would have this cult of personality around. Even Zelensky won a very large majority and then dropped like a stone in the polls as soon as people understood that he's not doing, all of the things that he promised. And in Russia, you have this cult of personality that's there because I guess Russia never really had any kind of Russia didn't really have a free society, if you think about it, maybe ever. And one could argue for very short periods of time, they had real freedom. And I'm not talking about democracy per se. I'm not talking about, hey, they can go out and vote and elect people they want. I'm talking about freedoms, right? The freedom to criticize, to express your opinion, to freedom of speech, liberty in the classical sense. I think there's a very low level of that in Russia as an idea. It's graded very low, below patriotism, below other things. And in Ukraine, it's kind of higher. Ukrainians kind of like their freedom and the opportunity to be assholes and criticize everybody and hate the government and and protest and stuff. It's different. Belarus, even culturally, from what I see, Ukraine is the close to Belarus. Maybe, I guess Belarus does have a dictator. Ukraine didn't really have a dictator ever. They had Yanukovych. Yanukovych wasn't a dictator. He was elected by the people from the east, pretty much, were supporting him. So those closer to Russia, but he was democratically elected. There were some there was some foul play on the elections, but I don't think it made a huge difference in terms of electing him. He was elected democratically. I think you can say that fairly. Yeah. And Belarus, yeah, Belarus. You feel bad for Belarus because Lukashenko is killing their language. Yeah, they're not. Again, yeah, but maybe that's a consequence. I'm not familiar with his policy on the language, but when I was there, I used to work for a financial group, and we had a bank in Belarus, and they weren't big on the Belarusian language, Belarusian language. The streets were in Belarusian, but most people were speaking Russian. And to be honest, it's pretty much the same in Kiev. I don't know if most people, but many people are speaking Russian, although the Ukrainian is the official language. But that's a consequence of the Russification of the Soviet Union, because Russian was kind of forced upon them, right? Yeah, you're saying it's because they were under propaganda. The Belarusian is the language of old people. Yeah, Ukrainian was kind of propagandized as a language of village people, right? Farmers and illiterate people. Yeah. After this war, I feel like Ukraine will start to move away from Russia. Yeah, yeah, it's so funny. People who have never spoken Ukrainian before are now trying to speak Ukrainian because of Putin. So good job, Putin, there. But it's super hard. So everybody's complaining, oh my God, my head hurts so much for, looking, like thinking about finding the Ukrainian words and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely happening. I think most people are still, speaking their usual language. But I was talking about just the other day about, there was a funny video from Azov, the Azov super ultra right battalion with some Nazis in there, and the guy was saying "уничтожил," which means which is Russian. So it seems that they're also speaking Russian, because you can't really. It's really hard. That part is really kind of. Putin is using Russian as a tool to kind of identify people. In the United States, people talk about ethnic Russians. This is not the Balkans. Ukraine is not like the Balkans where we have ethnicities. In the Balkans, in Bosnia, for example, where I come from, we have ethnic Serbs and ethnic Bosniaks who are mostly Muslim religiously. We have ethnic Croats who are Catholic mostly. And those are ethnicities, right? The language is a little bit different, but it's pretty much the same language. It's just a little bit of different words. So you can understand who people are, but it's kind of difficult to do that only based on the language. But in Ukraine and Russia, it's very different. Especially Russia. Russia is not a unified country either. Russia is a federation, and you have a lot of peoples in Russia. Let's start with Chechnya, right? There's a lot of Chechens who don't like the fact that they're in the Russian Federation, and Mr. Kadyrov, who's now ruling Chechnya, is definitely not supported by all Chechens. You have Chechens from Chechnya, Ichkeria, who are fighting on the side of Ukraine right now. So you have Chechens fighting against Chechens. You have Chechens on the Russian side and Chechens on the Ukrainian side.
He said nothing. You have it exactly right. I read immediately in Russian and then in English, thinking, my Russian is lagging. I read it on the Kremlin website, and I kept waiting for the payoff pitch, and it never came. It never came. And
I think people were kind of overblowing the whole thing where Putin would announce something on this day. It's totally possible. It's very Soviet of him to do that, but if, like I said, if everybody expects it to happen, Putin is a big contrarian. He's not going to say it. And also, he has limited options. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. But the way things are happening now on the ground, it's he doesn't have a lot of things to enhance, you know. If Russia breaks down, I honestly feel life would be better for everybody, Russians too. It depends what you mean by Russia breaking down. If you're talking about like the Federation breaking down, I think that's unlikely. I mean, if there was a, if they have a like a revolution of some sort, which I guess it's possible, but unlikely at this point. It's unlikely for now, right? Right now, it's unlikely, but it's definitely possible, like anywhere. Um, Life would be pretty bad for Russians for a while, right? Places like Chechnya would probably want to be independent, so they would probably have a civil war, and then there would be, just because it's a super large territory, there would be a lot of things happening at the same time. I have no idea what what would end up actually happening, but eventually maybe it would be better. I mean, the best thing for Russia would be to gradually. I mean, if we're talking about what we dream of, right? The best thing for Russia would be to gradually move to a more free society. At this point, it seems very unlikely it's going to happen voluntarily by the government. If anything, it's moving away from. People are talking about disconnecting from the internet and things like that. I thought they have the equipment for mass mobilization. They have the equipment. They don't have the the. They have the equipment. You can look it up. The reserves. I mean, the tanks, the artillery, especially the kind of cheap mass-produced stuff that's readily available. They have a lot of that, and they have the Air Force pretty much in. Well, it's not intact. They lost a lot of planes, but they have a lot of planes to start with. They have a lot of equipment. One of the reasons they have failed is because they have less people than Ukraine, especially trained people. Because of the failed strategy initially, they lost the best people in literally the first days of the war, right? They sent their best people in the front, and they just were decimated, right? And so what they have now is still professional army. So these are people fighting now are not conscripts. They're still people who want to fight, but they're people at the bottom of the barrel, right? So, poor people, people who don't have a choice, people who have issues, things like that. So that's who's coming in. I think they're on the verge of recruiting actual conscripts. At that point, the quality falls down incredibly. And even now, if you listen to the recordings from them, you will hear that a lot of these contract professionals are refusing to do orders, faking injuries, trying to go back, and stuff like that. So it's the people that's the problem, right? They have an AK for everybody. They have enough tanks, but I think the problem is that Ukraine is so much larger in terms of the infantry itself. What I saw, they have 2,000 tanks ready for war. The rest is so not ready. Yeah, sure. It's not ready to go. It's conserved. It's yeah, but they can make it ready. I mean, they have a large potential for them. Yeah, they lost a ton of. I mean, Ukrainians now, I think, have more tanks than they had in the beginning. So yeah, and of course, don't forget about the incredible amount. I mean, until you see the pictures, you don't understand the amount of weapons that's coming into Ukraine right now from NATO. It really is. Russian propaganda is now saying, "Hey, we're fighting against NATO." I guess the point being that it's not so. They're trying to find a way out of the whole situation and say, okay, well, we can't fight NATO or whatever, but it kind of is true. I mean, for all intents and purposes, NATO is now giving them gradually pretty much everything they want. With the Lend-Lease, they're getting what they want, not anymore what people think they need, so they're dictating things. They lack parts in industry to produce them. Then they shut down the only tank industry they have. They're okay with the tanks they have for a while. They would be okay for a year, maybe more. I think those were the estimates with just the stupid T-72s that they have, which is the large majority of the tanks that they use. They have some newer tanks. They're being destroyed as well. This is not a matter of like newer, older. They're using them wrong, and they're using them without support. They're using them, they're putting them in exposed places, and that's why they're losing so many things. If it was against NATO and nuclears weren't involved, Moscow would fall in 1 month. You mean if Russia didn't have the nuclear weapons? Yeah, I think the war in Ukraine would probably end in a week or so, and then the push to Russia would be super quick. And yeah, you're probably right. Maybe even a month. I think maybe 2, just because it's a very large country, so it's kind of it takes a while to drive, but yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. But of course, they do have nuclear weapons. And also, don't forget the fact that Russia is more capable on Russian territory. Factor number 1: people would be more motivated, right? Because when you're defending your own country against NATO, it's a different thing than being sent to a different country by your, officers who don't know what's going on, and they tell you it's an exercise, and then you end up in Ukraine, one beautiful morning. It's a totally different thing. The morale would be way better, and that's a very big factor. Their logistics would be way better too, unless it would be disrupted in some way by NATO, which is possible. But they have this huge train network and the infrastructure around that's really working well inside Russia, and outside you can see how well it's working. You can be motivated, feel NATO would bomb the shit out of them. Sure, yeah, of course. And when we say NATO, I always say when we say NATO bombing, we mean the United States, because that would be that would be what's happening. But yeah, I mean, F-35s are designed for wars like this, and they would definitely perform well, I'm sure, but there would be heavy losses by in NATO. There would be a lot of people dead. Russia's defenses are pretty good in terms of anti-air, and NATO would lose a lot of planes. But yeah, they would. I mean, I'm not questioning the fact that they would win. Of course they would win, but it wouldn't be easy. It's not Iraq, it's not Syria, it's not Afghanistan, it's nothing like that. It's a very different war, fighting against somebody who has real, actual modern weapons. Their operations suck. The way they do their command and control sucks, but they do have some good anti-air. So that would be probably the most challenging part. Once there is air dominance and air superiority, then it would be over pretty much for Russia, of course. Yeah, the Iraqi army was, sure, yeah. It was, but it's nowhere close to Russian army, and they didn't really have all the weapons that Russia has. And you can see how I would argue that the Iraqi army really underperformed. They were used to fighting, countries like Iran, and they were not ready for the U.S. at all. But when NATO won the sky, they just bombed them to the point where, yeah, that's exactly what would happen in Russia. Yeah, after, I'm just saying the same thing would happen, but there would be more losses, way more losses than the U.S. had ever had. Yeah, everybody talks. The highway of death, sure. That's one thing you need to understand. So I think, yeah, I think A10s were involved in highway of death. Let me open that link and let's look it up together. You can't use highway of death. Highway of death bodies have that war crime. Okay. I don't think it was a war crime. I think these were legitimate targets. So, scores of U.S. Marine. Yeah, they blocked them with rock eyes and then using a variety of weapons. Yeah, it doesn't say which actual planes were involved, but that was definitely brutal, sure. And you can see, I mean, yeah, T-54, 55s. Yeah, the Iraqi army used Soviet weaponry, sure, but there is a difference between 54/55s and, you know, even T-72s that are modernized. And the Iraqi army, I'm pretty sure here in this particular place, didn't have a lot of the newer systems. The Russian army has a really nice S-400 system deployed in mainland Russia, all around the place, and it works pretty well. It's super expensive. They couldn't keep it up. They wouldn't be able to keep it up for long, but it would definitely kill a lot of planes. They wouldn't be able to do something like this without, without a lot of losses. So yeah, they did. You can buy a lot of things from Russia, but Russia still keeps the best stuff for themselves. Although, again, in practice, you see in Ukraine, I think I saw a couple of T-90s, maybe tanks destroyed. They kind of, you don't really see anything fancy. You just see the mass-produced stuff. T-72s mostly, things like that, yeah. That was 1991. The US also used older stuff. Now the US is modernized, but Russia still uses it. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, it could be that technological edge is yeah, that has an impact. But also F-35s haven't been really used in combat against the modern army. So allegedly they've been designed for things like this, but we would know only when they actually start using them. I think it's safe to say that they would have losses, but yeah, air dominance would be established pretty quickly, and then it would be over. Some military commanders claim Russia is mostly stuck 2 generations behind. I think that's fair. I mean, it's the lack of money that's the trouble for Russia, right? It's not the lack of. They have some really capable planes, but they don't have the money to mass produce them, right? They have some really capable tank designs like the Armata, but they don't have, they break on parades and stuff, so they have to tow them. It's the lack of money. The Russian army is like a big tech demo for countries to buy their stuff. They don't have money to produce a lot of that stuff for themselves. So, yeah. And the corruption, yeah, sure. I might be too optimistic, but I think by the end of this month, Ukraine will be on the offensive. Ukraine is already on the offensive in the Kharkiv region. What Ukraine is doing right now, so Russia is now centering its attack on the southern part, and they're trying to, move forward towards Odessa, presumably. And what Ukraine is doing is it's attacking them in a completely different part in the north, forcing them to multitask. And multitasking is what made them lose the, phase one, allegedly. The part where they tried to attack from 8 different directions, and and where they lost a lot of people and tech. So Russia is already, I think, liberating a lot of villages, and people are starting to return to Kharkiv. I think there are traffic jams on the entrance of Kharkiv. Big offensive, I mean, you mean like pushing them out of places like Mariupol. Yeah, that will come gradually, I think, as they get trained using the big guns that they receive. Because right now, the problem right now is that they don't have the training, right? You get a lot of this stuff from NATO, but Ukrainians are used to Soviet bloc weapons, so they don't know how to use things like the German Panzerhaubitze or 2000 or things like that. They don't, you can give it to them, but they need a lot of training to be able to use them. Although they're awesome weapons, they need time to learn. So that would be a couple of months, in my understanding. Maybe a month from now, we would be able to see those weapons be actually used, but it's really just individual case. I've seen some videos that are definitely these newer weapons in use. So I might react to one of them on a YouTube video or something, but it's slowly coming in. Ukrainians are comfortable with javelins because they're point and shoot. It's relatively easy to use them, but these more sophisticated weapons need more time. So most equipment 2 to 3 weeks from what I saw, but some equipment might need more. Yeah. I mean, it's like those. If you remember when people were talking about the planes, let's give them F-15s or whatever. It's in a month maybe you can learn to, after flying a MiG, maybe you can learn to in a month fly F-15 more or less okay and not kill yourself. But these are super hardcore level difficulty missions, right? And you really need to be an expert. So just being good enough wasn't that it really didn't make sense. That's why I think NATO didn't really give them those planes. Even the Polish MiGs, they look completely different, right? They're in Polish, the layout is different. They have these NATO comms integrated. I guess you need to remove to give them to Ukrainians. I don't know. So I don't know even how that would work. So yeah, the Polish initiative to give them MiGs, sure. In a couple of weeks you would be okay with that layout. But if you trained your whole life with one layout and then you have to switch, it's challenging. England is now talking with Poland for supplying planes to Ukraine. Yeah. Since Poland sent 200 tanks. Yeah, those Soviet tanks are more or less okay. The bonus 30 planes, mix. Yeah, ideally, Ukraine would gradually move to NATO, and I think that's the plan. I think Zelensky said that as well. That's the long-term plan to move away from this, Soviet crap, and that would be a great boost for just getting the weapons that you're trained to use, and no problems with logistics and calibers and all this nightmare that they have. So hopefully that's going to happen. When that happens, it's at that point I don't think it would matter that Ukraine is not in NATO. If Ukraine would be technically compatible with NATO weapons, they would be okay. It wouldn't matter if Ukraine is capable of defending themselves. So I don't think they would need NATO help to defend against Ukraine in the future once they switch to NATO, which seems to be happening. Ukraine was trying to do that early on with some infantry weapons. They tried to make, I think they had an AK platform that used NATO caliber munition, or the other way around. I don't remember. There was a rifle that they tried to build, but it was very slow. Now it's kind of super quick and accelerated. I still have to understand the Russian plan. They're making enemies everywhere: Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Japan. Georgia is a complex thing. I mean, most Georgians, I think, yeah, would support Ukraine, but their government is not really so supportive. Georgia is one of the places where a lot of Russians have went after this war started because Georgia lets them. You can live, I think, for a year. I think. So I saw some Russian YouTubers go there. Those people, of course, don't support Putin. That's why they leave. But still, it's a place that accepts Russians, kind of. Japan, yeah, Japan was started to talk about those islands. Israel by calling Jews Nazis. Oh my god, that was so stupid. I kind of cringed when Zelensky started to talk about the Holocaust and how Russians are doing the Holocaust again, and it kind of is awkward because if you know the Ukrainian history, there was Ukrainians killed a lot of Jews in World War II, and it's kind of cringy to talk about it in that way. But when Russians started saying that Jews are Nazis, no, I'm sorry, that was over the top. I think Putin apologized for that, ended up apologizing for that. Yeah.
What you found there was just the resuscitation, the repetition of what I would call a salvation narrative. He can't possibly say in real terms why he invaded Ukraine. He invaded Ukraine because he wants to do battle with the West after long years of resentment. He invaded Ukraine because it was growing fitfully, more and more democratic, more and more away from Russia. And
I think this is bullshit. I don't think it's the fact that it was growing democratic, but it's definitely one of the factors. But Putin, I think Putin believes a lot of these things. People assume that Putin doesn't believe the stuff he says. That may be true for a lot of things, but he does believe a ton of things he says. He's very bitter about the perceived NATO expansion and aggression. I think he really believes that. I see no reason to think that he doesn't. So, what I think is in Putin's mind is that the Ukrainian people are basically Russians. It's a single people, whatever. He wrote an article about this. And this puppet government was installed by the US, and it's leading the country using propaganda or whatever. It's leading the country to NATO, and the end game would be to put missiles on the border or whatever silly things he's talking about, because that doesn't make sense. When you go to that point, okay, what then happens? You don't have a good answer because it doesn't make sense. But that is definitely the talking points, and those talking points are repeated by, as I was talking to about Jimmy Dore and Tucker, of course, those people. My chat just last stream was repeating those same talking points. So it's they believe that. I think they do. I don't think they're faking it, and I think Putin does too. And I think there is some truth to the claims that NATO wants a weak Russia. I think they do, because the whole point of NATO would be to protect against Russia. But I mean, in its nature, NATO is defensive. I don't think the fact that NATO aggressing against Russia makes a lot of sense. I don't think NATO would do that ever, especially when we see how slow they were reacting to this aggression from the Russian side, right? They're terrified of things like nukes and irritating Putin and stuff. So history is full of mistakes, but the fact that Russia refused to move on and live in the past is sad. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the best thing Russia would do would be to just, develop their economy. And people say the economy is weak because the West is against us. That's not true. The economy is weak because of the corruption and because of the focus on the fossil fuels. It really is just a gas pump. And if Russia's economy was strong, I don't think anybody would be against that. I mean, look at China. China was able to peacefully, dominate the global economy and open up things that were never opened up before. There is no really Russian people are really smart. There's no reason why Russia couldn't lead in, things like cloud apps or mobile apps or stuff like that. It's not a coincidence that you don't see them coming from Russia. People leave to other countries. The only thing that works in Russia is outsourcing and stuff like that, like India, because people who want to invest into countries that are stable, they have the rule of law, they don't have corruption. I think that'll be the dream of the West, to have a country like that does, that has cheap workforce, that are smart, and that does and they will get that in Ukraine right now. I think that's what Ukraine will become for the West, I think, very soon. It's sad India acts the way they do. In 2020, their prime minister had a great speech. Friends, the age of expansion was over. This is the era of development. Wherever we're seeing expansion is still, refused to act. Yeah, refused to act. Yeah, he kind of defaulted back to the cult of personality and all of that, because that's just easier. I honestly believe that everybody kind of defaults to that after a while. So having limited mandates and having restrictions on people in power is probably the smartest thing we can do, because the power corrupts everybody. Look at Zelensky right now, and look at what he's having this huge support right now. He's doing a lot of things that are kind of worrisome in Ukraine right now. He's acting against free speech, even in, I mean, sure, when the country's in war, you can't really have true free speech, right? But he's doing things that I feel are not justified by that. He's kind of trying to build this cult of personality, and it's going to be, I could totally imagine him as another dictator eventually, but the only thing that's going to stop that is probably the outside influence. And maybe the Ukrainian people, I don't know. China had smart person leading them. The only thing Russia had was Yeltsin and Putin. Yeah, Yeltsin was a joke. And then Putin was big on business initially. He was big on building the economy. And in a way, he kind of did a ton of things for Russia initially. He did. I mean, one of the reasons why he's so popular is that he kind of rescued the Russian economy. But then, as the years passed, as people say, there are no more cats that remember times before Putin was the president, because they all died. As the years passed, he kind of lost the touch, and he could have left as the best president Russia had for Russians, right? But instead, he decided to do this. So Putin wants to make everybody believe he's strong, but he failed to fight against corruption. Yeah. To be fair to Putin, it's incredibly hard to fight against corruption in Russia. It's ingrained everywhere. Corruption is everywhere in China too, and it's on levels that are impossible for people to understand in the U.S. The U.S. has corruption, of course, and there's a lot of money moving around in all kinds of ways, but it's nothing compared to corruption in countries like Russia and Ukraine and places like that.
More and more away from his conception of some form of modern imperial Russia. So he needs a vocabulary for that to relate to the Russian people, and it's not there. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the invention of Nazis comes from.
there's this ideology that's behind all of this stuff, but there's a guy called I think his name is Girkin, his real name, but most people call him Strelkov. He's one of the founders of these regions in the east. I think DNR. Let's not lie to you guys. I'm gonna look him up. So I think, yeah, Girkin. This is the guy. Ex-FSB officer like Putin. Yeah, so Donetsk People's Republic. Yeah, so he was one of the ideologues behind DNR. This guy is super interesting. I've listened to his commentary on what's going on just recently, because he was kind of ousted by FSB by Putin in the region because he was committed to the ideology, and Putin isn't. So I don't really buy this Putin the ideologue thing. I think Putin is very practical, well, trying to be very practical, but it seems that in this case he got a lot of bad information as well to act upon. He got Crimea really easily, and he thought probably that the thinking is that, hey, I grabbed that, so maybe I can get away with grabbing Ukraine too. So this guy, if you can find a video, if you don't speak Russian, if you find a video with subtitles or something, it's very interesting to hear him speak about the Ukrainian army and the way they're fighting. And he's very critical of the way that the Russian army is fighting, and he sees no potential for them winning at this point.
Yes, there are people there are some people who are on the far right nationalists in Ukraine, but to call this a national trend, or to not fail to see, or to fail to see that nationalism comes from somewhere, is to know nothing about Ukrainian history.
Or the idea that Putin has a problem with far right nationalism. I mean, given Russia,
far right nationalists
right.
all over the place in Russia, including in his own house.
Yeah.
And he's losing it.
I don't think these guys know what they're talking about. When Putin talks about Nazis, he's talking about Nazis. He's not talking about nationalists in particular. He's talking about the actual Nazis. And there were some in Ukraine, but they were, of course, super exaggerated. They did never. I was talking about Azov just recently, and Azov never had, not even just Azov, but even the far right. They never really had any power in Ukraine. And they were super magnified by Russia. They were, everywhere. Hey, these guys are all over, and blah blah blah. And Ukraine did some missteps in maybe tolerating them too much, because you really, in any country, you don't want to. You don't want to maybe ban them, but you don't want to talk to them in the way that Ukrainian government has talked to them. And maybe they were too afraid of their support or something, like the lack of their support. But definitely it's not the Nazi. I think that's one of the weakest arguments overall. You can say that, we're protecting Donbass, okay. You can even argue for the NATO thing, but to say that Ukraine is a Nazi country, and that's just bullshit. And the whole thing with silly.
He's losing it. And, I thought I was full of news here, having read, a Russian website all about lenta.ru and all those amazing things that went up. And you obviously, you had it, and it's a terrific thing. It made me think of a different time. In 1968, the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia to put down what was called the Prague Spring. What happened? Nothing happened, right? In Soviet terms. 7 or 8 very brave people, including somebody pushing a baby carriage, came to Red Square and took out banners and said, Czechoslovakia, we are with you. We're against this invasion. Within a minute, predictably, KGB officers, obviously guarding Red Square in the Kremlin, were on these people, beat the hell out of them, and all those people were arrested and most went off to prison camps. Pavel Litvinov, somebody I wrote about in Lenin's tomb many, many years ago.
I fail to see how this is related to anything. I'm not sure why people draw these parallels with the Soviet Union. I mean, Putin likes that, but Russia is not the Soviet Union. It's very different. It's a very different country. They're using a lot of the same methods, but it's a very different country.
That was a 1 minute long, almost invisible protest. And it had immense repercussions with the years. The dissident movement was inspired by it. Sakharov was inspired by it, you know, became more and more overtly Andrei Sakharov, leader of a dissident movement. It's hard to know what instances like this demonstration on Lentaru of incredible bravery, or that woman who some weeks ago ran behind the TV presenter and also
during the nightly news. Yes,
unbelievable.
Yes, incredible.
So when he's talking about Lantaruk, he's talking about talking about some people writing an article that's basically critical of Putin and like replacing an article on the site that was already on the site, replacing that article with another one that was of course immediately deleted, but it's still in the archive.
And I think it is the presumption is that everybody is for this war because everybody listens to propaganda television, and that's that. I think as time goes by, because people are not stupid, because mothers are receiving phone calls from their sons at the front, because casualties are building up, and the economic repercussions are making themselves known, that the ability to keep all this information out of the public consciousness will recede. And his problems will not only be just military. His problems will not only be just his confrontations with the West, but I think it is entirely possible that as his fury grows, so too will his problems.
Which should change our expectations in terms of what he believes he can ask the Russian people for, or he can tell the Russian people they're about to deliver.
What we were waiting for this morning
was a big mobilization.
Mobilization.
Yes.
So people that were...
He's doing that in the mobilization, I think, is starting to happen, but he's kind of doing what's like a hidden mobilization. People are getting letters. It's going to happen if the war continues. That's the only thing that can happen. Probably announcing it on this day was something everybody expected, so Putin decided not to.
Reservists, kids from all over the country, or young men from all over the country. First of all, that would have enormous economic repercussions. It would heighten alarm among the general population about what's at stake in Ukraine. Why is this taking so long? What is this special military operation? It seems
this guy doesn't really have a clue. That's not how it works. It's not how it works at all. But it's true that with time, it's going to be more difficult to keep this narrative up. The narrative is pivoting into we're fighting against NATO. That's what the narrative is moving. That's the pivot. So that gives you an out of saying, okay, let's, we're starting to retreat or whatever, because that's also inevitably what will happen. So maybe that's the long-term plan, but people are not questioning the whole special operation thing. Most people are kind of calling it war. I don't think it's a big deal, the actual wording. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of understanding here.
It's a lot more serious than that. And the nonsense begins to corrode. One of the information things that happened this week is an awful guy on Russian television named Vladimir Solovyov.
An awful guy. Well, I guess you could say he's awful. I personally, this guy, if you've never watched this guy, watch him. He's awesome. I love him. He is so over the top that he's basically a walking meme. So you can't really take him seriously. I'm sure many people do, but he's just silly.
And he runs some spectacular propaganda television shows. He was sent to Mariupol to kind of lead the propaganda. Imagine Tucker Carlson being sent to, I don't know, Charlottesville to whip up
Poor Tucker.
fervor in a kind of civil war. That's the move. That's the move. And it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work.
He was supposed to inspire the people of Mariupol to get excited about Russia
No. Oh my God. People of Mariupol? There are no people of Mariupol anymore.
invading them.
Well, and also to be filmed and show it to the folks back home.
Of course. It's not. People, the Russian strategy right now is pretty much to level everything to the ground, kill everybody, and slowly move forward. That would be the summary of their current strategy. So they're not into winning hearts and minds.
David Remnick,
That we're liberators.
this understanding about how what the room in which Putin feels he can maneuver, even if he is, as you say, losing it, I think is going to change the American calibration in terms of how much we can maneuver and how he may respond. And I feel like we are only starting to figure it out.
Well, I think you guys are a little bit far away from figuring it out based on what I hear. But I mean, the major points, I guess, are correct. There was one more video I wanted to take a look real quick, but that's gonna probably happen on a separate stream. I think I'm gonna wrap it up for today. I'm gonna announce on the channel when I'm gonna stream next. I'm not sure, probably not tomorrow. But there's a lot of stuff I want to watch and also work on the stuff from YouTube. So make sure to watch me on YouTube too. And of course, for people who watch me on YouTube right now, this is a recording from Twitch. So make sure to follow me on Twitch and be notified when I stream. So far, I have more time to stream than to produce videos. So hopefully that's going to change a little bit soon. But for now, it is what it is. Thank you guys for watching and come again. Talk to you soon.